So look, this whole session with sailed to the takeoff of the book I wrote, Develop Idea. I was involved with PowerShell since its launch in 2006 at Europe in Barcelona. And, the hangout, this it was. It was. That was the big thing. So look, when you get to hang out with this team and stuff and go out to dinners, have drinks and everything else, you get a lot of clean fat camel story. And some of those stories are really neat. The things that groups would share about some of the decisions they made about the language or this direction or that direction and the trade-offs they had to make are really cool. And they can give you a lot of insight into why things are the way they are. And sometimes you'll run across stuff you're like, that feels weird. And you're like, yeah, it's weird because this other thing happened and we had to fix that thing first. And it's just really great background. One of the things I don't think I leaned on it heavily in both, and probably want to do this section, is PowerShell was not loved inside Microsoft universally when it was being created. And it's a huge company, and there's a lot of competing priorities, a lot of competing, and some of the largest egos in the galaxy live there, right? Some very strong opinion. And some of the stories really tell you how you can make stuff happen in a really scrappy way inside of a giant like that, which means there's a lot of left with that delay, right? There's a lot of these whole things against you in your own life that convince people way to get something done in a way scrappy. And so I want to kind of be able to now I want to start with the plethora that PowerShell was kind of that. And a lot of folks will go straight to, clearly the kind of software administrator automate. And that's not actually the state stage stuff. Yes, to do the administrative automation that PowerShell. It's just, you're going to be playing with this KPI of a record, and you're going to have to learn all about the underlying .NET classes, which work completely differently because they were written by different people with different agendas and priorities. And you can go over here and do some stuff in the old shell, and you can go over here and do this. And it's like a million tools that all work completely different. What PowerShell was trying to solve with that, it was just trying to put that consistent face around it all. A face that wasn't designed for a software developer, because all the tools you had was essentially designed for software developers. Then it's kind of the face around that was designed for ad. People were used to running a command that had some strict results and MI parameter, and then you'd be stringing those together in a 30 order and have some simple variables so that you can fill in a username and then use that multiple times to build up some, and that's what it was product called for. And out of the gate, it did a good job of it. And that was like job one. It did a really good job of it. But the reason I bring that up is it's really important to understand that a lot of the design decisions, a lot of the compromise, right? So designing anything on a computer, a compromise, right? I can design the speed, leave up a lot of memory, or I can design for a very small memory footprint, but if I run slower, everything the trade-off with PowerShell work almost, not entirely, almost all around putting lipstick on it. It's like, let's take this really difficult set of APIs, classes, DLL, blah, 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 and serve this problem to this one audience. That's really key. Because when PowerShell first got out there, a lot of folks to use that will come within the DB people. I know it's kind of this I made too. I was doing a lot of writing about DB stuff. And they approached the computer, very DB stuff, but some of them will get really frustrated with PowerShell initially. They're like, this program language only has like 13 keywords in it. Yeah, but it's not trying to solve for a software developer, trying to solve to this. Software developers would get into it. And you know what? It's a great way to just really quickly spin something up in .NET and try something out as you're coding. You don't compile anything. It's like the mini .NET Dell. They're like, yeah, it doesn't have classes. It doesn't have, object inherit. But yeah, they just stop for you. You've got C#. Kiss that. Right? Now look, over time, and iterations, a lot of those things got put in there. So it has adapted to a broader audience that, like any kind you're messing with, and why? Probably because that wasn't wasn't the mission. So that's really, really important that you find in years of it. And it contextualizes a lot of the other stories. How many of you have read the Monad Metaphor? But if you haven't, there is an annotated version of it on meetingcub.com. It's free. You can need it for a PDF or whatever. It's super, super short. And what's really neat about this, and anytime you're trying to get something done, that document is a great example of someone setting out a vision and really trying to explain this is for. There are the problems in the world. This is what we're trying to solve. There are the more stages in which we are going to try and solve. There are really 14 pillars in that document. And if you go back and push 3, PowerShell version 1, 2, 3, and 4 hit pillar 1, 2, 3 in that one. Like that's a road. One of the reasons that document had to come into existence, by the way, is because at the time, Microsoft was on a little bit of a tear for using their India technology side, shipping development over to India. And one of the ways that the team was able to get this work greenlit was by agreeing, they had a strong stamp. It's like, you give me a project and you would get that stuff for you. You know what the time lag is between Seattle and India? It's like 3 days. That's not a joke. Because you type something up, an email at noon, it gets to them at midnight, and they're not going to read it for 12 hours. And when they type to the reply back, they're doing it at your midnight a week ago. And now imagine trying to explain to a bunch of people who are software developers that might never have met an administrator in their entire life you're trying to accomplish with a 24-hour lag. Really apart. And so the manifesto was written in part so it can lay out a vision so everybody should be on literally the same keeper about what we're trying to accomplish. Anytime you're trying to pitch something before, anytime you're trying to stick something anywhere, putting together that vision, because it not only helps everyone see this is the goal, this is where we're going. So give them something to throw rocks at. That's when people go, okay, if we're going to accomplish this, here's the 10 plugins. Great. Let's figure out what those 10 problems can just to get going and working hard so that we can get to the that's still a way for everyone in the room that's seeing where they are. What will they play in bringing that biggest together? And that's really important. Most people want to keep at the top of that. And with a good vision, you're showing them what's it, and this is where you are. You stick here, it can matter. You help them get that. Really, really good vision. I really recommend you read it from that perspective. Microsoft, especially back then, still stood to this day, had a really fuzzy software quality. Plus, it was a culture where software engineered code, and then they shipped it over to the QA and they run flat load. If you take a giant product like Windows and have to break it down into multiple and just do that, but there would literally soon this in the being, and I know a few did that, who would show up at 5 o'clock in the afternoon after the software engineers were starting to filter out, and they would take that day's build and they would start loading it in the rack and just running cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts. And if there was a failure, they didn't fix it, they just fixed it back. Here's the test support, go set your codes. That is a really heavy cycle if you're trying to do something agile. Now, this isn't Bash Microsoft, right? Windows runs on a quadrillion processors, and some of that should have. So you can't just do agile and start to treat that code. There's a reason to do something who's heavier processors. But it makes it difficult, especially when you're trying to skip 800 Nambus, right? To every single one of them done gets detected. So this is where, again, lesson to take away. Get really captive. What's the minimum thing you need to ship so that we can have the minimum amount of testing going on? And then what else can we get through something? What they ship was an end. That was the official shipping thing. The end. Because that's the only thing that we have to busy. Canonically, like at the end of the day, the manlet domain is calling .NET class. The .NET had its own manlets themselves especially the earliest one, was C versus dead. Like, not a lot going on. So they didn't present a lot of risk. It's an engine, right? It's the thing that spins up and moves on the state, gets a pipeline instantiated,
commands into it, and actually starts calling all those .NET classes. That was the big deal. So by compressing down,
just really target up. It's a ton of the quick. It's about thinking on that comes to God. Everybody always takes out it. So for a ton of this, it's passing it is about, right? Well, that's codes. So let's but for taking out code, you start taking out bugs as the console bus. But stack that. Back then, with that theme to it. You tended to have really monolithic stuff where with that was a code. Like, have you seen Word? Remember Word? Like Word 2003? What are like 89 bars? Right? It's this in app. That's how people approach check were back that fine art. Remember, this was before the cloud had really invaded every corner of the universe.
We weren't talking about microservices architecture. People did thick client middleware server application. Thick. Big apps. So this idea of stripping something down to the bare minimum was not super common, but it was really tactical. It was a way to take this huge process and minimize how much it slowed everyone down. So the important thing there is really dig down to first principles. What are we trying to solve? Who are we trying to solve it for? And what is the least we can do to get there? Because we'll iterate after that, right? This next one, this is my favorite story in the whole book. And it is a huge lesson. Jeffrey is fairly well known for some very provocative type of statements. I am too, right? Every time you use right host, God kills a puppy. Right? So look, there's a reason to make statements like that. Now, as soon as you make that statement, there's like immediately 100 bullet points of, okay, also, I mean really, and this, and this, and this, and this. The reason you do that type of thing is not just to get a chuckle out of the room, although that's very, very, very helpful. It's to take someone who's in a brain space, right? They're on a certain set of rails, and you need to convince them to be over here. But first you have to get them to stop. And by saying something that's very, quick and pithy and a little provocative, you're like, oh, and now I can talk to you, right? We've stopped the train. Now we can get it over here. Let me explain why God kills a puppy when you use right host. Jeffrey's, one of my favorite provocative statements. Who uses SSH? A lot of us do. And how often do you connect to a new machine and you're like, yeah, it's fine, just create a key, that's cool. Right, we all do it because it's easy. So his thing is SSH is too much like a San Francisco bathhouse, a lot of anonymous sharing. It's a bold thing to say, but what? Let me explain. Right, now I can get you over here. So one of the favorite stories in the book, this was back in the days at Microsoft when Bill Gates still had a lot of input into everything. And Bill was very famously blunt with his opinions. And particularly to get something on the Windows DVD, that's a huge deal, right? Remember, this is code that represents the company's entire purpose at that point. And it runs on a zillion processors, and it's very important, and you can't break it. And to get something on the DVD is a big deal. Everybody wanted their code on the DVD because that means everyone's going to have my code. They don't have to download anything. It's super low. They're going to adopt my code because they already have it, right? It's a really normal product decision to want to make. But there were people in the Windows team whose job it was to stop that shit because they needed that to be stable, not full of crap. Stable. So getting on the DVD is a big deal. One of the things that was used against PowerShell initially was remoting, believe it or not. So how many of you used remoting? Yeah, awesome. So you know that when you run a PowerShell command locally, you get back a bunch of objects, and they're live objects, right? You can run methods against them, you can pipe them to other commands, everything else. But when you do remoting, it's not like that, right? It runs on the remote computer, which then has to serialize all that into XML, transmit it across the wire. It's just text at that point. It's not connected to software anymore. And then it deserializes it, but all the methods and stuff are gone because it's not connected to the software anymore. Software is still over there. So you just get this like static representation, which is fine. I mean, we all know that. I feel like we've all adapted to that quite well, but that was an argument. It's like, no, the behavior of this product is inconsistent. And people hate inconsistency, which is just not true. So, you know, the story goes, Snover kind of had to think fast because they're standing there in front of Bill, and Bill can kill this whole thing like that. So he says, and it's really irritating that you're in the room now because now I have to really get this right. He said, so I just got these new glasses, and it's my first bifocals. And I've had to learn that it's inconsistent in how I use them. Like when I'm in the car, I have to look through this part, but when I want to read something, I have to look this way. It's different views of the world for different purposes and different times and different contexts. And that's okay. We all do that all the time. We use the same things in different ways, and we expect different behaviors from them. And Bill bought it. But here's the lesson. Being able to come up with a really quick analogy, one that steps away from whatever it is you're arguing about, right? Glasses are not a technical thing, they're not a computer thing, they're not a PowerShell thing, they're not a Windows thing, they're not a Microsoft thing. It helps people shed some of their biases and their presumptions because now they can focus on this whole different thing. And you keep it very simple. All analogies fail if you follow them too far, right? That's not their purpose. Their purpose is to help someone understand a perspective in a way that removes it from their current connections, a way that they can understand it using other experiences they've had. It is the single most powerful way to teach. It is one of the most powerful ways to persuade. And if you're not good at it, one of the best life and career skills you can invest in is getting better at it. Really think about it. For example, I like to say that in the world of software, I can explain anything with a car analogy. Like, give me 5 minutes, and give me 5 seconds sometimes, and I can probably come up with a good analogy using cars. Object orientation, cars, no problem. Like, almost anything. Find something that works for you, and really start honing that ability. As you run across some concept, or as you're debating processes or procedures or whatever in your company, even if you're not bringing this out into the open conversation, practice it. Like to yourself. How would I explain that with an analogy? How would I persuade these folks? And you take it out of their context. It's not about your business, not about your product, not about your service. It's about something else that everyone can universally understand that's real simple, that reflects the argument you're trying to make or the thing you're trying to explain. Really practice that. I can't even tell you how powerful it is. And you've seen it, right? You've seen people who are good at it. You've probably seen people who are bad at it. Get real good at it. It's an incredibly powerful way to work through leadership of all levels. So this next one is about filtering and the evolution of the pipeline. We might come back to this because this is going to be, I actually did have a slide for this to show this. This is a fun one. So, do you think you're projecting? No, I'm not. I'm just using this as my own notes.
And are these slides in the room with us right now?
Yeah, the slides are in the room with us right now. So, one of the things that remoting does and needs to do is buffering, right? It's got to be able to buffer a bunch of data as it comes over from the remote computers, potentially multiple remote computers, and assemble all of that so that it comes out in the right order, right? Buffering is it's a standard thing in networking that exists at almost every level of a network stack, right? You've got your TCP/IP sliding window so that you buffer packets as they come in, and if they come in out of order, you hang on until you get the rest of them and you put them in the right order. That's really what buffering is all about. During the development of PowerShell, and incidentally, I don't know if you know this, PowerShell version 1 basically had remoting. None of it was enabled. There was a few bits that didn't get done in time to ship, but they really almost had it working in version 1. If Exchange 2007 had slipped, they would have had time to finish remoting probably. Like it was almost across the wire. But this is a really funny story from the book. There's a program manager who helped run the PowerShell team, Ken Hansen. Super, super nice guy, super, super smart guy, really, really good leader. The developers kept taking remote buffering off the to-do list. And Ken kept putting it back on the to-do list. He's like, I'm the goddamn program manager. And they're like, well, we're the goddamn devs and we're not gonna do it. It's hard. And they're like, okay, look. Let's not talk about hard, let's talk about trade-offs. What's it gonna cost me to get remote buffering done? Like, what do I have to pay? How much time is it gonna take? And they came back and said, look, it's gonna be six weeks. And the team was like, shit, right? That's a lot of dev resources to get a thing that we kind of have to have, yes, but there's other stuff we also kind of want to have. So Snover went home and wrote it in like 13 lines of code. He's like, you're overthinking this a little bit. So he takes it, he shows it to them, and they're like, oh, well, if that's how you want to do it. And the takeaway there is, like, get tactical, right? I work with the product team in my company and our engineers and everything else, and everyone likes to do the t-shirt sizes, right? Is this a small, medium, or large effort? And it's always a large somehow. I'm like, yeah, but I need a button that does boldface. Why is that a large? Like, show me your code, put it right there. Copy this button, make another button, and change the I to a B. Why is this hard, right? Be willing to dig in, right? Challenge those types of assumptions. Make people defend that position with facts, right? Because sometimes, like, how many of you are a SWE, a software engineer at work? Like, that's your job. All right, just do this. It turns out that SWEs are also humans. And sometimes they just don't want to do a thing. They're not excited about it. It's like my dog. I know he heard me. Because if I rustle anything plastic, he's there. But he won't come. And he's staring right at me. Like, they're just like that. So really, they're more like dogs. But just recognize that there's a lot of reasons why you might have things in your way. Maybe you just haven't explained it all the way. You're like, no, just like this. It's easy, like this. That was a really good story. I like that one. We'll come back to that one. I wanted to talk a little bit about cruft. People do get wound up a little bit about consistency. And they want to know the reasons why a thing is there, because understanding this lets me start to make inferences about these. And if I understand this, I can start to understand these. And so when something is inconsistent, it sticks at us. Because it's like, maybe I didn't understand this, because this doesn't fit. Like, this is round and this is square, and why is that? Sometimes someone just screwed up. Like, sometimes there's no reason. So how many of you know what a function is in PowerShell? Yeah? How many of you know about the filter construct in PowerShell? As the development went on, so filter was one of the first things they put together because they wanted you to be able to build your own little filters in the pipeline, right? Pipe a bunch of shit in, look at each one, and you don't have to write the for loop. We'll do it for you. We're just going to call your little filter once per object and make your life a little simpler. You don't have to write enumerators or anything else. And also, by the way, that means you're not blocking and having to go through 100 things. You only have to look at one, and then one, and then one, and then one, and then you can keep shipping them out and other things can start running, right? It's a great construct. And you kind of get into it, and you go down a little bit of a rabbit hole as a designer, as the software engineers who are writing this thing. You're like, oh, you know what? We could also, because sometimes you're going to need to do some setup first. Like, I'm going to need to open a database connection, which means I'm going to need to do some teardown later, close the database connection. And then I have this middle section. So what we'll do is a before, And then we'll have the actual stuff, and then an after. And you know what? I mean, this is really starting to just look like a function because there's going to be input. So let's just call it a function. Well, they just forgot to take filter out. That's all. Just nobody did. So it's still there. And once it's there, like once you ship it, you can't take it out now because some idiot will base their entire script on it. Right? So it's one of those things, especially as I was teaching PowerShell. And in the beginning, it was real easy for people to figure out that that was there because there's literally like 13 keywords in the entire language, and it's one of them. So like you can process that in your head. They're like, what's that there for? I'm like, meh. Is it better than this? No. Is it different? Not really. It's just this part of it. So it's faster? No. Well, then why is it there? They forgot to take it out. That's all. It's okay. These things happen. But it is really neat to see that evolution, right? Because a lot of times when we get software, we get this like fully realized thing that just bursts forth from the company, and you forget that there's this kind of ugly, organic, squishy process that got it there, and you're almost always going to have cruft, just leftover stodgy bits. And you're like, why is that like that? Well, we shipped it that way, and now we can't change it because someone has based their entire business on it. It is a really tough part about backward compatibility. Well, there's nothing wrong with it. Sure, whatever. It's fine. He wouldn't let him take it out. Okay. Just sure, it's fine. Fine, doesn't hurt anybody mostly. But it is worth, especially like if you came to PowerShell later in the game, you know, version 5, version 6, you know, now 7 and up, that a lot of that legacy is just backward compatibility. Like, you know, 5 years into a product, you're like, you know, we could do a lot better job with this, and let's do it. Let's make a super duper function, but we have to leave the old thing in there forever. And so it's like the genetic history is just baked right in, which if you think about it from that perspective can kind of be cool. Filter is a tailbone. That's a good way to look at it.
No, because the tailbone's not a There are dozens of us.
So this is I had a slide for this, which I won't be able to show you, but I want you to imagine a Unix command, such as sudo, you know, change owner -r system, blah, 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 right? Here's how Unix parses that, Linux, whatever. Here's how it parses that. The shell sees sudo and stops thinking. It grabs everything after that, runs sudo, and says, here, you figure it out, right? So now sudo has got to be able to parse all this stuff. So what it's actually doing behind the scenes, obviously, is it's spinning up another process and shoving the rest of the command in there, which then has to get parsed. And so the next thing is, okay, change owner, fine. I'll run change owner. Here, you figure it out. Which is why the syntax of Unix commands are all over the frickin' place, because everybody who writes a command gets to reinvent everything from scratch, and they do. And they have to be jokey about it because it's Unix. So a difficulty that you have when you're going to introduce something new to the world, right? Like PowerShell came into existence in a world with shells that had been around for decades. And it can feel really challenging to catch up, right? It's when a new game console comes out, it's got 11 games available, you're like, meh, I'll stick with the old one because I've got a library of 300 games. And it takes a while to catch up. The PowerShell team knew that they had to speed that shit up as much as possible. Like the window for people to love PowerShell was pretty short. If they didn't get a lot of love right away, there was always a chance Microsoft was just going to kill it and reassign everybody to go write more toolbars for Word, which is exactly what happened. So they said, okay, look, one of the worst parts about writing a command line tool is parsing all the command line input. It's a pain in the ass. Yeah, there's some libraries that people have adopted to make it easier over time, but it's still a pain in the ass, and everyone does it differently, and it's hard, and it's like writing user interface. Most software engineers despise writing UX, especially CRUD forms, right? Oh God, I have to write another CRUD form. That's why we give it to the cheapest, newest guy, and that's his rite of passage, is he has to write a bunch of frickin' CRUD forms. So it's the same idea. So one of the biggest areas the team decided to invest in that engine, and remember, the more you put into the engine, the harder it's going to be to get it through that heavy test process and actually ship it. The more lines of code you have, the more bugs you probably have. So you have to be real tactical about what you choose to invest in and shove in there. Also, you have a limited amount of time, limited amount of money. Exchange 2007 has signed on to this thing, so they're going to ship, ergo we have to ship, right? You start to get all these pressures. So when you decide to invest in something and put it in the code, it's a big deal. And one of the biggest things they decided to invest in was to do the parsing for you. When you run a PowerShell command and you string 30-odd parameters up behind it, the person who wrote that commandlet didn't have to think about that. They get a neatly organized input right into their variables. They just say, here's my parameters, and PowerShell says, okay, I'll figure this shit out. Let's see, this one's positional, so I'm gonna shove that in that variable because you've told me how that matches up. Let's see, this dash value is gonna go in your value variable, and dash name is gonna go in your, and this idiot only typed dash NA, but that's fine, I'll figure it out, that's name. Fine, that goes in here. All of that is really hard if you think about how you would write the code to deal with that. But in PowerShell, you don't. It's super, super easy. And so that meant the people who were writing the commandlets didn't have to work real hard. They really got to focus on just what the commandlet was doing, and they didn't have to deal with all the shit that usually goes around having a command line tool that you have to parse and everything else. PowerShell did all the heavy lifting, the scut work, the dirty jobs. It did all of that. And that meant the software developers who were writing commandlets had a lot of incentive to write a lot of them. And when they're writing a lot of commandlets, that's exposing a lot of functionality to us, the users, and that makes us happy. And we start to use that thing, which means adoption, which means now there's 1 million people running the code, and Microsoft is like, well, guess we'll keep doing it. Really tactical, right? That's a good takeaway. If I'm gonna do this thing, what are the barriers behind it becoming successful? Well, if people don't use it, that's bad. Okay, what will make people use it? Give them a shitload of commands. Give them all the functionality in the universe. Okay, well, I can't do that. So how do I incentivize other people to do that? Make it easy. Okay, what's hard? This is the hard part. All right, I'll handle that. I'll knock down that objection, and that clears the runway to the thing I want, which is adoption. So a little bit of process engineering, right? You got to go talk to people. Hey, if you're a software engineer and I asked you to write a bunch of commands, I'm not writing command line tools. Screw that shit. No, pain in the ass. Just buttons. Buttons are easy. I can do it in Visual Basic. We'll just do buttons. Toolbar buttons. All the buttons. Well, no, I need this. What? Because I don't want to parse all that shit on the command line. Oh, okay. Let me go think about that. And you get real tactical about it. Last one I want to talk about. Let's see. This is another one where I had a code example I was going to show you. Oh well. Is kind of the evolution of the pipeline. You're going to have to imagine this. So this is not how things work today. But imagine I'm running a command called get-file. Okay? With me? Close your eyes if you have to. It's fine. Just picture it. And I'm going to say get-file dash where name equals star.txt. Dash sort name dash first 10. Give me the first 10. Right? That's one command. That's not how PowerShell works today, is it? But it's how it started. But what happens is you sit down and you start to look for patterns. And you say, am I going to put a dash where parameter on every single command? Because we're going to ship like 130 of these things in the first version, and then hopefully 700,000 million in the next one. And that just doesn't seem super efficient to have to rewrite that code over and over and over. I mean, we could make them like common parameters, and the shell knows how to do them. But that's going to get weird depending on where the data is coming from, right? Like some data sources don't have filtering capabilities. Some can't sort. And so that's where the idea of the pipeline, which has always been a thing in Unix-based languages. I mean, the idea of piping commands to one another is super, super, super old. But that's when you're like, why don't we just stretch that out? And so now it's where. So it gets get file, pipe it to where, pipe it to this, pipe it to this. But that can be inefficient, right? For example, what if I'm running a command like get file on a directory with 10,000 files? I'm going to have to run all of them through this where command. And that is a totally legitimate approach, and you can do it today, and it's fine. Like, you won't go to hell for it, but it does have a cost to it. And that's where another area of inconsistency comes up, because some commands do have filtering. Like if I run get file, I can do -name star.txt. Because the underlying data provider, the file system, has that capability built in. And if I do it that way, the cost is lower. It'll be faster because that's native binary code that's doing that for me. It's super, super quick. It was designed to be super, super quick. A lot of engineers put a lot of thinking into how to make it super, super quick. But not every command that gets me data has a -name that will take a wildcard or has a -filter. That inconsistency is okay. Again, different context, different capabilities. It doesn't change our understanding of the underlying thing once you realize that the commandlet isn't doing anything. It's just calling some underlying bit of code, and those underlying bits of code aren't consistent. We live in an ugly, inconsistent world, and reality will reflect that. So, I run into this a lot in my own work where, I run a team that builds curriculum. My company is a provider of apprenticeship training in the UK, which is a very big government-funded system. It's awesome. And we produce about 14 new programs a year. And I've got a whole team of folks, learning designers and SMEs and everything else that work on this stuff. And they get very bent out of shape around consistency, right? When we write a new unit, here's the template. You start with an introduction and you do this, and then there's the hook, and I'm like, that's fine, guys, but we're talking to different people sometimes. Like if I've got this program over here that's designed to teach you basic data literacy, and this one over here that's designed to teach you massive back-end programming in Java, we get different things going on. Let's start with the template, but then let's adapt that. Let's make it inconsistent to better serve that particular audience. Because a template is one size fits all. And nobody likes one size fits all. People want something that feels like it was made for them, that matters to them. And that's inconsistent, but that's okay. So when you're in projects and people are really pushing for consistency, push back a little. Consistency is healthy. It helps us understand the world. But consistency taken too far can make our world more difficult, harder to operate, much less personal. So there's a balance with all those things. I wanted to see if you guys had questions. Really? I've been sitting here for like 45 minutes almost. And
Is there a good story around why the exchange team decided to adopt it?
why the exchange team? A little bit of persuasion. The exchange team had been hunting for a while on automation. If you think back to 2000, this is so, it's almost like cognitive dissonance because everything is online now. We do everything through the web. But like back then in 2005, 2006, when all this was starting to happen, even a little bit before then, Exchange was one of the biggest pains in the ass in the organization. Because you've not only got just the day-to-day provisioning and deprovisioning as people leave, you've just, anything you want to do, you have to run against 10,000 mailboxes. And all they had was next, finish, next, finish, next, finish. And it was getting to be a problem in organizations that, if you have 100 mailboxes, who cares, right? If you have 100 mailboxes and you're running your own Exchange server, you did it wrong. But if you've got, 10,000, 50,000 mailboxes, everything is instantly hard. Next, finish, next, finish. And because it's mail, it's like one of the most visible parts of the entire IT infrastructure. Like that's the one thing everybody knows when it's up or down. Instantly, they know it's up. Mail's down, shit. So they were really looking for ways, and they had invested heavily in LDAP, which is fine, but also stupid hard to use. They had a lot of this was the phase where everything was starting to shift to .NET, right? .NET had come out 03, thereabouts, and everybody was getting on board. So they'd invested pretty heavily in writing .NET classes, which is great for a developer. But as a customer of Exchange, does that mean I have to hire a developer to build my own shit on top of Exchange so that it's not hard to use? That seems like a bad deal. Although Salesforce gets away with it somehow. And so they were looking for an answer. And because that one was such a proximate issue, right? So if you think back then, what were the big Microsoft server products other than Windows itself? Exchange, right? That's a big deal. What's the other one? SQL. SQL had a language, right? DBAs had been automating shit in SQL forever because it's SQL, right? The solution was already built into the language, really. And they had already invested super heavily in everything else, which is one of the reasons, arguably, the SQL team originally was able to get away with such lackadaisical support for PowerShell, because they'd already solved the problem. And if you're a DBA, you already know the language, and you have the solution, and you don't need to mix and match it with 20 other things. This is all you touch. Exchange didn't have SQL. And so they were out hunting for a solution a little bit. I suspect that probably helped a lot. I know that they went really far down the VB script path, but like everything else in VB script, it fails you at the last mile. It's like, I can get nearly there, but nope, can't do it. So yeah, they made and also if you can convince the Exchange team, because it was arguably the most complex server product Microsoft had at the time, until SharePoint was inflicted on us. If you can win over the Exchange team, pretty much nobody else has an excuse.
Related question with Exchange. When I was learning about PowerShell, one of the things that I do was manage stuff with in our 2007 Exchange server, and we had maybe 100 mailboxes, so we're doing it wrong. But one thing also I was learning about PowerShell, learning about remoting. Mr. Hicks here, a lot of stuff on remoting, and one of the things that kind of hung me up on that was an understanding of modules and how they worked. And I found it really interesting when I figured out that the Exchange module was an implicit module. The way it did the remoting and
yeah.
I was like, wait, it's not installed. It's this weird kind of thing. So I don't know if you have any insight on that.
Yeah, so
As to why they chose to implement it that way.
Well,
Still do.
yeah, so yeah. So the question is kind of around Exchange doesn't really do implicit remoting in the way that we would normally think about that. But so the question is kind of around, why did the Exchange team choose to go that route? One is just the nature of client-server architecture, right? You've got a command running on your computer, but the Exchange software is on another computer, and so there has to be a way to go get that. The Exchange team was also looking strongly at a world where there were going to be fewer and fewer on-prem deployments and more multi-tenant in the cloud. Like they were thinking bigger. They weren't thinking about you and your company. They were thinking about them and their company. And so a lot of what shipped with Exchange 2007 was very, very forward-looking. Like a lot of it really didn't make sense or have a lot of utility in that moment. It was scaffolding for the future. Where, now if you're on M365, which I assume the entire planet is, you don't know what Exchange server you're on, but it's not like they set up a new Exchange server for every single customer. It's a multi-tenancy situation. And so they knew that the computer you're running on was not only going to have to talk to another computer, but that computer would be in the cloud and have multiple people's data on it. And so they really put a lot of those structures in place to do that. The whole idea of constrained run spaces, where once you connect to that server, you're an admin ish, but we can't like let you have other people's data. So we're going to really restrict the parameters you can use and the commands you can run. They were thinking about that problem and really drove a lot of how remoting shaped itself originally, because it was there to solve a problem, and they were the ones who could really articulate the problem they saw coming. The idea of, so the other complicated server, SQL Server, there was no real plan to do multi-tenant SQL Server in the cloud at that point. That day was way off, decades off. So the SQL team wasn't really grappling with that, but the Exchange team was very much grappling with it because they were already doing kind of some hosted Exchange, but it was standing up an Exchange server for each, or in a VM, for each customer. And they knew that that wasn't going to scale. So they were the ones really thinking about that problem at the time. Yeah, well, one more.
This is not a long one. You mentioned the need for backwards compatibility, right? Once you ship it, you got to support it. When we went from Windows PowerShell to PowerShell Core, we really, changed.
Yeah, so the flip from Windows PowerShell to PowerShell really did dump on certain areas of backward compatibility, except it didn't, because it wasn't Windows PowerShell version 7. It was a new product. Right? We went from running this product, and now it's a brand new product. You obviously want to keep as much consistency there as possible, because you want to bring your audience along for the ride. But at the same time, you have to recognize that the underlying rules have changed. .NET Core is not .NET. Linux ain't Windows. And so you adapt to the new world that you live in, and you try to put as much sugar in place so that folks can come with you. So like when you run ls in PowerShell on Linux, you're actually running ls, not get file, right? Because it's a different world. We have to respect this new playground that we're in. But you put as much sugar as you can to bring people along to kind of smooth it, but it's always going to be a little rough. There's always going to be differences. For folks who were really paying attention to what Microsoft was espousing as the right way to do PowerShell, they had the easiest ride, because Microsoft worked really hard to make that a smooth bridge. Everybody else, too bad. Look, thank you very much. My time's up. I would really love to hang out and chat with you guys. I'm going to be here the rest of the day. I leave tomorrow. So please do come up, say hi, chat. I'm going to rush over to my next room for next talk. Thanks.